Well, good morning again, everybody. My name is Mr. Folks. You guys might remember me from devotions last week, where I told you guys the story about Jesus feeding the 5,000 and taught you a little bit about cooking. Well, we're done with that today, so we don't need that anymore. Today I'm going to be telling the story that follows directly after that. And it is the story where Jesus walks on water. I wonder if you guys have had any experiences being on a boat, whether it's been going fishing or going sailing or things like that, because today's story spends most of its time in and around the water. So if you remember last week's story, Jesus has just finished feeding the 5,000 people and he's performed a great miracle. And it's the end of the day, he's sending the crowds home, it's late at night. Jesus is really tired, so he tells his disciples to get in the boat and head across the sea to where they're headed the next day. He's gonna catch up with them because he needs to spend a little bit of time in prayer. So Jesus goes away and prays, and the disciples get in the boat and start traveling across this sea. And the Bible says that throughout the night, the disciples end up with a pretty rough time on the ocean. There's a lot of wind and it chops up some pretty choppy big waves and heavy seas, and it's not a pleasant time to be on there at all. And in the middle of all of that, it says that the disciples see Jesus walking on the water towards them. Now, I'm going to stop because imagine you're in a boat and then there's just waves rocking you to and fro, and it's really late and dark at night, and then in the distance you see someone walking. That's pretty freaky. And understandably, in the Bible it says the disciples all were terrified. They thought they saw a ghost and they were afraid. And it wasn't until Jesus got close enough to the boat and called out to them and told them, "Don't be afraid, it's me, it's Jesus," that they were sort of calmed down a little bit. But again, they've never seen anyone walk on water. I mean, have any of you ever seen anyone walk on water at the moment? But in the middle of that, Peter, one of the disciples, yells out to Jesus and he says, "If it's really you, then tell me to come out of the boat and I'll walk towards you." And Jesus says, "All right, come out in the boat, you'll be fine." And Peter gets out of the boat, puts his feet down on the water and takes a couple of steps and walks towards Jesus across in this water. Then Peter starts noticing these huge waves rocking to and fro around him and this wind whistling through his ears. He becomes afraid. He takes his eyes off Jesus. He gets distracted by the things around him. Then the Bible says he starts to sink back into the ocean. And then, understandably, really terrified, he cries out to Jesus. He yells out for Jesus to save him. Jesus reaches out his hand and he grabs Peter and he pulls him back out of the water. He says, "Why did you have such little faith?" And then Peter and Jesus climb into the boat. And the Bible says, as soon as Jesus steps into the boat, the seas become calm, the waves die down and the wind stops. And everyone in the boat is amazed and they say, "Truly, this man is the Son of God." Now, I really love this story. And I love this story because I think it paints a really good picture of what does it really look like to follow Jesus in today's world. And there's different characters in this story, and we can look at them as being maybe who are we in this story when it comes to following Jesus. Now remember, there's 12 people on this boat, there's 12 disciples, and 11 of those disciples are happy to stay in the boat when they see Jesus. The boat for them is a safe place. And for some people, the thought of following Jesus is just like that. Trying to step out on that boat is just too scary. Our boat is safe. It's calm. Even if the waves and all that are rocking around us, we know it's what's going on here. The boat is familiar to us. So we don't want to get out of that boat. We want to stay in our safe space. But for one of those disciples, and for some of us, we realize that stepping out and following Jesus might be a huge risk. It might be this big step out, but we know that what we're heading towards is something bigger than that. And when Jesus calls Peter out onto the boat, he goes for it. And then takes a big step of faith, because up until that point, the only person that Peter has ever seen walk on water before is Jesus. And he has nothing to know that he's going to be able to do it himself other than the fact that Jesus says he can. So it takes a big step of faith. And for those of us who decide to follow Jesus, it does take a big step of faith. But I also like this analogy that goes one step further, because we look at what happens to Peter, and as he takes his eyes off of Jesus, and he starts getting distracted by all the things going on around him, he starts to sink. He loses focus on Jesus, and that's where things start to go a little bit awry. And I think that's a perfect example about everything that's going on in the world today. It's really easy for us to lose focus on Jesus, who is the person who's called us. and look at all the things that are going on around us that seem to be really chaotic or really unsettling or just make us afraid. And when we lose sight of Jesus, we start to sink. We start to become afraid. We lose that faith connection with Jesus. And Jesus will rescue us like he rescues Peter. But he reminds us that if we keep our focus and our strength put in him, then those things that are rattling around us, they won't seem so scary because our eyes are on Jesus. When everything around us can look so big and so terrifying and so unsure and uncertain, we can ask the question, are we keeping our eyes focused on Jesus because he's the one who's in control? He's the one who knows what's going on. He's the one who's called us out. And so if we keep our faith and our trust in him, then even though the waves are rocking, the wind is blowing and all those kind of things, we know that we're safe. So that's the story about Jesus walking on water and Peter following him in faith. And I hope you guys can draw some lessons from that. It's a great story. It's in Matthew 14 if you want to look it up. And other than that, I hope everyone has a great day.